Welcome, everybody. I am very, very excited to have David Kessler here as my guest today. Hello, fresh from Maui. I'm a little jealous, but I'm coping. And, and I was trying to remember in anticipation when we first met. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was the Psychotherapy Networker Conference, 2016. Is
Might have been there. So first of all, so lovely to see you again. And yes, I have no complaints. I just arrived in Maui, so I'm grateful to be here. And I think it was then, and I remember you are such an icon. And I remember seeing you in the distance and going, "Oh my gosh, I wonder what she'll be like." And a lot of people, many times we've all met our heroes and we're
right.
sort of sorry we meet them. And when I met you, I was like, oh, she's as lovely as I would have hoped she would have been. And you are. And I'm so grateful to you. It
Oh, thank you.
was really nice. And I've really, I know with my, was it last book, Finding Meaning? I think you gave some of the trauma sections a read for me. You were so gracious to help out with that. And um, right back at you with your books. Anything I can do, team you. You're just amazing with the work you do in the world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I have been, actually, I'm going to talk tomorrow uh, about your making meaning um, concept and really, I think how it just changes the whole relationship to grief. I love talking about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, sometimes people will say when someone's had a loss, oh, are you getting the lesson? And
Oh,
I always hate when people say, are you getting the
ah,
lesson? I'm like, it's not, I mean, maybe there is a big life course we're taking. I get that concept,
yeah,
but I often feel like, let me take a class or get another degree instead of people I love dying. And
right.
um, you probably know the background, but for folks who may not know of the finding meaning concept, I've been doing this work for years, and I was really um, privileged to have worked with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross and written two books with her and helped adapt her stages of dying for stages of grief. And she would always tell people, as I did, grief is not, there's no linear path to it. Grief is very messy, it's very organic, it looks different on everyone. And after decades of doing this work, now almost 10 years ago, not quite, my younger son David died. And I not only experienced it as a father, but as time progressed, a few months into it, that guy who's watched and been a part of everyone else's grief was looking at mine and would go, yep, you're in denial. You can't believe he died. Yep, you're angry. Yep, you're bargaining. Yep, you're depressed. And I remember when I started to think, I'm going to have to accept this loss someday,
Mm,
I thought, that can't be it. What? I just accept it? There has to be more. And I wanted there to be more. And Kubler-Ross and I had often talked about people sometimes confuse acceptance with the end of grief.
mhm.
And I would always say, when people say, how long will we grieve? I always say, how long is the person going to be dead?
Right.
Because if they're going to be dead for a long, right? If they're going to be dead for a long time, we're going to grieve for a long time.
Right.
So, and we will hopefully eventually grieve with more love than pain. It doesn't always have to be pain forever.
Right.
But I was looking and thinking, there has to be more. My son David just can't disappear from this earth and that's it. I went back and read Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search
Mm.
for Meaning.
Right.
And I also had thought about there were times meaning and grief didn't fit together well. And I wondered why. And one of the things I discovered is bereaved people often think when they hear meaning, they go, there's no meaning in a son's death. There's no meaning in a spouse's death, a murder, a death by COVID, a crime. There's no meaning in those. And one of the things I learned and wanted to write about is the meaning is not in the horrible event. The
Right.
meaning is in us. It's
Right.
what we eventually do. It's who
Right.
we become after the loss.
Right.
And I
Right.
was so honored, Janina, that the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation and her incredible son gave me permission to add a sixth stage of meaning to her iconic stages. So
Well, that's wonderful. So it was really with their blessing.
it was with their blessing. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. Because I really think it adds something so important. I mean, I think when we get to acceptance, when we've finished bargaining and fighting and railing and thinking we're going to die, that the point at which acceptance brings such a feeling of kind of calm. But the idea that that's not good enough, that we need something. I mean, we're going to tell a story about a loss anyway.
Right.
So let it have meaning.
Right. And it's interesting. I have a grief certificate program, and I was just teaching in it the other day. And I was telling them about how, we attach a story. The fact is, there was a death.
Right.
We, with a story, decide was it a good death, a bad death, a profound death, a meaningful death, a meaningless death? And some of those stories we can all agree on more if it was tragic, things like
Right.
that. But at the end, it is a story that we have in our mind. The death isn't a story, the death is very real, but we add a story to it.
Right. Exactly. Right. And the story we tell and the meaning we make just are so different.
Yes.
And I was thinking
Steve,
about that
go
just
ahead.
last week because it was the anniversary of my partner's death in 2016. So maybe I met you in 2017 because,
I think we met before then because my son died in 2016. And your partner was alive, and my son, I think, was alive when we first met.
no, when we first met, actually, it was a little over a month since she had died.
Maybe
So,
I had just seen you there and was too intimidated to meet you. Maybe I just saw you. That's why it's registering earlier.
but I remember I was so happy to meet you because I was still in the throes.
Yes.
And it was just, it's always wonderful to meet somebody who's not going to say one of those platitudes that are going to make you crazy.
Those platitudes like, at least they're not suffering anymore, or they're in a better place, or all of those things we often say
Right, right, right. And of course, with good intentions,
with good intention.
but it just always the wrong thing to say.
And it's interesting, when I think about grief and trauma, I think about how connected they are and
Yeah,
how grief must be witnessed. And also the idea about how we heal grief in connection with others.
Mhm.
And I would imagine that's just as true for trauma.
You know, not necessarily, because, since trauma is, as a general rule, associated with human beings, I mean, there are virtually no forms of trauma that are not connected to human behavior. Um, Humans are so triggering that it's hard to heal in connection with them. Um, but grief is very different unless the connections you have are not getting it.
Yeah. And
Right.
because I always thought about trauma and grief as, the healing doesn't necessarily come from the people who we're close to, or if it's trauma hurt us, it may actually come from other people doing repair work by seeing us, by being with us. I often say grief is a time when our family and friends can feel like strangers because maybe they don't get it. And strangers, another person in grief could feel like family because they
Mhm.
get us, they see us.
Right, right. And I can remember so many times. I actually remember the most emotional moments for me were came from the kindness of other people.
Yes.
I remember a friend of my son's, of my older son, just came by my house, didn't tell me in advance, just knocked on my door and brought me chocolate chip cookies and spicy tofu. And I was like, I just burst into tears. That is food for the griever, right? That's exactly what you need. And it was just extraordinary. The I've never felt so loved in my life.
That's such a good point. And I'll tell you what goes wrong. What goes wrong is we say to the griever, what do you need? As if we should all have a list ready in our grief. And we don't know what we need. But
Right.
I tell people they're a human being. You can imagine. I bet Janina eats. I bet David eats. I bet they need someone to take their kids to school. I bet they need their garbage pulled out on Tuesdays like we do, or whatever it may be. Like
Right.
just show up and help the way he did was so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the fact that actually nobody asked me what I needed other than my grown-up sons. But it was the spontaneous, just loving gestures of
Yeah.
people, whether I knew them or not. It's
And that's what touches our heart. I have a very similar story. I remember after my son died, maybe a couple of weeks later, everyone had brought food. The food was all gone. I was looking around for something to eat, and I opened up my freezer, and someone had slipped a frozen lasagna in there.
huh,
And I thought about someone came into my home during the gathering after the funeral, and without me noticing, put a frozen lasagna in the freezer, knowing this day might come.
right, right. So
How
sweet.
sweet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing.
Very sweet.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of you know, obviously there are losses that people don't know about, or where there isn't a community to offer support. but I'm struck by, I did a little research for a seminar on grief I was teaching, and that's where I found making meaning, and I was struck by how every religion has really organized ways of grieving.
Absolutely. And that are meaningful to them and might not make sense to others.
Right. And the thing that most struck me was in most grief traditions, there is an extended period of grieving and and a marking of that first year anniversary, which I just thought, gee, look at this. People have been wise about this, about the anniversary, about the fact that it takes a year just to get through the kind of the dark, the darkest of the darkness. And just it was really inspiring.
Well, and most people don't do the kind of research that you did to take the time to look that up. And I'll
Yes.
tell you what's really interesting that I and my colleagues have found. People these days think grief is like a TV series that they've watched. We've all seen a TV show. The first
Mm.
episode, someone dies. Next week's episode, we all cry. Third week's episode, we move on. And then grief comes to our life, and we go, why isn't it like TV?
Right.
And the fascinating thing is, my colleagues and I were talking. Do you know when the average person shows up for therapy or grief counseling around their grief? 5 years.
Wow.
Do you know when the
Wow.
second time is? Right after 1 year, they thought at 1 year it was magically going to go away,
Right.
and it didn't.
Right. 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 That's amazing. 5 years later.
I was talking to a colleague of mine who did a study at 9/11, after 9/11, with widows who had lost their spouses in the World Trade Center.
Mhm.
Firefighters, lots of folks. It Now that was different. You had sudden, horrific, traumatic loss, obviously
Right.
September 11th.
Right.
It was around 7 years before they said they could just believe they were single again.
Wow.
So I always say, Janina, grief has a longer shadow than we think it does.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And and it can't be rushed. I get very frustrated with therapists who think, okay, it's time for this client to grieve. And why are they not grieving? Like, because grief has its own timeline.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have an online groups with 26 different groups for people who have had the death of a loved one. And I'll tell you, it's interesting to see people coming in at all different points. Some come in week one, some come in 6 months, a year, 2 years. The grief hits all at different periods.
Right.
And
Right.
it's also dependent on our childhood, our history with grief, how we were raised, what our beliefs are.
Right. Right. Yes. Absolutely. And whether, in my family, it was not polite to cry. And I grew up in a very, very sort of waspy, intellectual, you never show emotion. And And so I had a terrible time the first time I went to a funeral with my parents because I started to cry. And I remember I said to the person I was with, I said, I've got to get out of here. And she said, why? Right? The service is just finished. We're going to start to talk to people. I said, I have to get out of here because I'm crying and my parents might see me. And I'm so,
Wow.
and I'm so glad I recognized that that was a little weird. Oh, I know, because she said, this is a funeral. You're supposed to cry at a funeral. And then I realized, oh, okay, this is a virtue, not a problem.
Every day
And
in the grief group, some people say to me, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying," and they apologize. And I say, we're in a grief group. If you can't cry here, where can you cry? It's a grief group.
right, right, absolutely, absolutely. And
And if, go ahead.
I just um I really understand the aversion to grief that people have. I mean, even when you're in the midst of it, it's it's hard to embrace it.
Yes. I don't think I would use the word embrace. I don't think it's embraceable.
Right. Right.
Sometimes I think you just gotta, just sit and hold yourself as you're going through it. And it just feels bigger and overwhelming. And there's waves, and it just feels like it's too much for us. That's what grief feels like.
Right. 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 I mean, I learned to ride the waves, and that helped enormously. Rather than kind of, tense against them. I actually worked at relaxing my body and just letting the grief flow through.
So
And it
smart.
made a huge, huge, huge difference. Um, and it was totally counterintuitive because you want to tense against it. You want to stop it.
Right.
Right.
And we also think whatever that feeling is, we project it out, that we're going to feel that intensity, that feeling for the next 40 years.
Right.
It just feels
Right.
like it's here to stay, and it's horrible and we can't survive it. And I try to normalize that for people when they tell me, you don't know how bad it is. And I'll go, you're right. I don't know how bad your grief is. But I'll say, it makes sense that it's so horrific. You are probably going through one of the hardest times of your life right now.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And and I think if we as a culture sort of made people aware of that, somehow the message I get from the social world is, you're supposed to cry, and as you say, and then you're supposed to be over it. But but to actually make it a premise, it's like childbirth. Now everybody knows that childbirth is one of the hardest things a woman will ever go through. If we say that about grief, I think it will give people more permission.
Yes. And to be open about it and to talk about it. And, so many times people will say, I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to upset everyone around me. And I try to teach people, you don't have to make your grief digestible for others.
Right,
In fact, you're teaching everyone else how to grieve when this moment comes to them.
right. Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
say the death rate's 100%, so all your friends are going to deal with it too. But just like you said, they might not be thrilled to be learning the lessons through you. It might make, other people's grief might make us uncomfortable.
Right. right, right. Or if we were assuming that grief meant suffering, we might relax more around people's grief. And if
To
that was
just
our
be with it.
job, yeah,
Yeah, to just be with it.
right, right. That's why I love the Jewish practice of sitting Shiva, because I think it's a tradition that says just show up and relax around it,
Yeah,
or
just
be
to
with it.
sit, to have time to talk about them.
Right, right. Yeah,
You know, another Jewish tradition that I really love, and there's so many we could talk about, but of all traditions, of all religions, but in Judaism, many times they will give the relatives the shovel to put the dirt on the casket. And here's the thing, they will tell them to hold the shovel upside down. And the
wow.
interesting thing, that the rabbi shared with me about the origins of that tradition is you are burying that person and having to do the most horrific acceptance by throwing dirt on the casket, but the shovel turned upside down shows your reluctance to say goodbye
Oh,
and to let them go.
wonderful. Oh, wonderful.
Because we have to figure a way to say goodbye and we don't want to.
Right. And I don't think we are wired. We're wired to attach. We're not wired to accept loss.
Right.
Right.
I also think, the world has changed so much. I sometimes will talk about I'm teaching people what our great grandparents knew how to do.
Right.
They
Right.
they saw death around them. I mean, we very much have sanitized our society.
Right. 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 Yes. Right. Um, it's amazing. It really is amazing. But I'm so glad that you have a whole institute and you're training therapists and running groups. It's really, really, it's special.
It really, it came out of so much pain in my life. As so many of us do this work, we're turning our pain into purpose. And all those resources, plus many others, folks can find at grief.com. I want to make sure people have lots of resources to go through these tough times.
Right, 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 which is so important. Yeah, yeah.
One of the
Well,
things that I want to really leave your listeners with is something I often think about, and you said it in so many ways today, is I often say to folks, what we run from pursues us, and what we face transforms us.
right,
We're just like you say, we're wired to run from grief. Why would we want it? And just like you did, when you can allow the waves, that's when the transformation happens.
right, right, right. But I do want to say, I want to kind of stick up for people who try to avoid their grief because I do think that we pathologize them instead of understanding. Of course, we all would avoid grief if we could. It,
Right.
it's just knowing that eventually the tiger will eat us that slows us down. And also it takes a lot of work to avoid.
Yes.
Right?
And if I can stick up for those folks with you, sometimes people will say, they're in denial, or someone will go, I'm in denial. And I will often talk about the grace in denial,
Mhm.
that we could not take in all the pain at once. And when we're quote by others denying or avoiding or pathologizing that. That is the wisdom of our soul and our psyche, giving us only what we can handle in that moment. So I'm right with you on that.
Right. Great. I'm so glad because I just I hate I just hate to see people who are scared
Yes,
and pathologize.
right.
It's it's normal to cry and it's normal to try to avoid crying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, our grief is unique as our fingerprint, and we all do it differently. And our relationship, even siblings, all had a different mom or a different dad. You know, we're all doing this differently, and it's so important. People go into comparisons and judge each other's grief. And the
Right.
question I get asked, not surprising to you, I'm sure, is people always want to know which grief is the worst. And I always say, yours. Your
Right.
grief is the worst. That's which one is
Right.
the worst, yours.
Right. Right. So beautifully said. Well, on that note, we should stop. David, I knew I wanted to talk to you, and I'm so glad we did. Thank you
Me
so
too.
much.
Oh, and I will look forward to seeing you in DC again.
Yes, yes. Everybody come join us at the Psychotherapy Networker Conference. It'll be fun.